The year is 1914, and the air over Europe feels heavy with more than just summer heat. It is the weight of alliances, the hum of industrial machines, and the quiet ticking of a clock that no one realizes is seconds away from striking midnight. For decades, the continent had been a web of empires bound together by treaties and rivalries, a place where kings and emperors still held sway over millions, and yet a place where factories and railways were already reshaping the very nature of power. When the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, is shot in Sarajevo, it is not merely a royal tragedy. It is a match dropped in a room filled with dry timber. One assassination, and suddenly the machinery of war roars to life. Austria-Hungary turns to its ally Germany, Serbia looks to Russia, and soon France and Britain are drawn toward the edge of the abyss. The First World War begins. In our familiar timeline, Germany's leaders chose to bypass France's fortified border by marching through Belgium, believing it would be the swiftest route to Paris. It was a move rooted in cold calculation, but also in dangerous underestimation. Belgium's neutrality had been guaranteed by Britain, and the violation of that neutrality gave London both reason and resolve to join the fight immediately. From that moment, the war transformed from a continental struggle into a truly global one, and Germany found itself facing the combined weight of the British Empire. But in this alternate reality, the decision is different. Berlin's generals, after fierce debate, choose not to invade Belgium. Instead, they commit to a direct and brutal push through the French defenses in Alsace-Lorraine, a bloody route to be sure, but one that avoids the instant wrath of Britain. Without that early provocation, the British government hesitates, weighing its commitments against the political risk of entering a war not yet threatening its own security. The effect is immediate. The Western Front takes shape in a narrower corridor, and though French fortifications are formidable, the Germans pour overwhelming force into the assault. While to the east, they commit to smashing Russian armies before the vast empire can fully mobilize. Austria-Hungary, bolstered by German support, holds its own in the Balkans, and the pressure on Russia mounts by the week. Meanwhile, in Paris, the French government sends urgent cables to London pleading for intervention. But the British cabinet remains divided. Some ministers fear a dominant Germany, others believe the conflict will burn itself out before it can spill further into Europe. And so Britain watches, hesitant, giving Germany the one thing every military commander craves: time. With Britain on the sidelines, the war becomes a duel between France and Germany in the west, and between the Central Powers and Russia in the east. The trenches still form, the mud and barbed wire still claim countless lives, but the scale of resistance is different. France fights valiantly, yet without Britain's manpower and resources, the strain begins to show far sooner than in our own history. And in the east, the Russian armies face devastating defeats at Tannenberg and beyond. Morale plummets, whispers of revolution grow louder, and the Tsar's grasp on power begins to loosen. By the winter of 1915, this alternate war is already tilting toward the Central Powers. Germany holds firm in the west, while smashing through Russian lines in the east. Paris braces for a long and punishing conflict, Berlin grows confident, and Vienna sees hope where once there was only desperation. The world is changing, though few yet understand just how completely it is about to be reshaped.
The spring of 1916 in this alternate timeline feels like a slow but certain turning of a tide. In the east, the Russian front is collapsing faster than even the most optimistic German officers had dreamed. The crushing defeats of the previous year have left the Tsar's armies broken and retreating, entire divisions surrendering without firing a shot. The rail lines from Petrograd groan under the weight of wounded men and empty rifles. Whispers in factory towns and rural villages speak of hunger, corruption, and the foolishness of dying for a war no one believes can be won. Germany seizes this moment with calculated precision. Instead of dividing forces between two desperate fronts, as in our own history, the Central Powers coordinate with a unity that surprises even themselves. Austrian troops push deeper into Galicia. German divisions pour toward the Baltic, and Ottoman forces tie down Russian attention in the Caucasus, each success tightening the noose. Back in the west, France is bleeding slowly, its fortresses holding for now, but at enormous cost. The German High Command knows that victory here will come not from a single dramatic breakthrough, but from relentless pressure, a war of exhaustion that France cannot endure without help. And that help from Britain has still not come. In London, the cabinet debates stretch into months, and each week that passes without a declaration of war is another week for German industry to churn out shells, rifles, and the steel sinews of conquest. Diplomatic cables fly between capitals. The United States watches from afar, trading freely with both sides, but leaning ever so slightly toward the Central Powers. Berlin makes sure American businessmen hear of French weakness and Russian collapse, presenting a picture of a war that could be over by year's end if only Washington stays out of it. In this version of events, there is no sinking of the Lusitania to inflame American opinion, no unrestricted submarine campaign that forces President Wilson's hand. Germany keeps its navy cautious, unwilling to give the Allies any excuse to rally neutral nations against them. By summer, the Eastern Front as a coherent line ceases to exist. German troops march into Minsk, Austro-Hungarian banners fly over Kyiv, and the Black Sea becomes a contested arena where Ottoman warships hunt Russian supply lines. The Tsar's ministers plead for peace, and in December 1916, a treaty is signed in Brest-Litovsk, far earlier than in our reality, stripping Russia of Poland, the Baltic states, Ukraine, and Crimea, all of them either absorbed into the Central Powers or placed under friendly puppet regimes. The impact on morale in France is devastating. Where once there had been hope that Russia might draw German strength away, now there is only the grim knowledge that all those divisions from the east are turning westward. By early 1917, trains full of German soldiers rumble toward the frontiers of France, fresh troops with high morale, battle-tested yet hungry for the final victory. In contrast, French units rotate between battered trench lines and hospitals overflowing with the wounded, reinforcements that never seem to arrive in time. Paris braces for the storm. The streets hum with both defiance and quiet dread. Cafes whisper about the possibility of moving the government south. The Eiffel Tower looms over a city that knows its fate may soon be decided not in diplomatic salons, but in the roar of artillery on the horizon. And still, Britain hesitates, torn between fear of a German-dominated continent and the calculation that it may be safer to negotiate with a victor than to fight one. It is in this fragile balance that Germany prepares its grand offensive, one that will not only aim to break the French lines, but to shatter the very will of the Republic to fight, an offensive that in our timeline was blunted by British aid, but here will face only a nation already standing on the edge of collapse. The moment is coming when the fate of Europe will be rewritten entirely. The spring of 1917 arrives with the sound of steel and thunder rolling across the French countryside. The German High Command launches its great Western offensive, a storm carefully prepared through the long winter. Trains have delivered fresh divisions from the east, artillery parks brim with shells, and the skies hum with reconnaissance aircraft, mapping every French trench and bunker. This is not a gamble, but a calculated strike meant to break the Republic once and for all. The assault begins before dawn, a curtain of artillery fire sweeping across French positions in waves so precise it feels mechanical. Entire sections of the front vanish beneath the smoke and dust, and when the guns finally lift, the German infantry moves forward with ruthless coordination. Stormtrooper units infiltrate weak points, bypassing strongholds to strike deep into the rear. French commanders scramble to patch holes that multiply faster than they can respond.
In Paris, the news spreads with grim speed. Telegrams from the front speak of villages changing hands 3 times in a day, of regiments cut off and fighting to the last bullet. The government refuses to speak of retreat, but orders are quietly given to move critical ministries south to Bordeaux. The shadow of the Franco-Prussian War and the fall of 1871 hangs over the capital like a curse returning for its due. Without Britain in the fight, the French lacked the reserves to mount a counterstroke on the scale needed to halt the Germans. Local successes are swallowed up by the sheer weight of enemy numbers. The soldiers who face this onslaught are brave, but bravery cannot replace shells or rifles, and every day the German advance pushes closer to the heart of the nation. By midsummer, the outer defenses of Paris come under bombardment. The people of the city wake to the distant rumble of guns. The rail stations are choked with refugees carrying what they can. Soldiers march past the cafes with tired eyes but set jaws, determined to hold every street if it comes to that. But the writing is already on the walls, and everyone knows it. When the German army finally encircles Paris, it is not the siege of a starving medieval fortress, but the modern strangulation of a city in an age of rail and telegraph. Supply lines are severed, communications cut, and the threat of heavy artillery bombardment forces the French leadership to negotiate. The armistice is signed in the early autumn of 1917, and the tricolor over the city is lowered. The terms are harsh. Alsace-Lorraine is formally absorbed into Germany. Northern industrial regions are occupied under the pretense of reconstruction, and France is forced to pay crushing reparations. In public, the German Kaiser speaks of restoring stability to Europe. In private, his ministers speak of making certain that France will never again have the strength to challenge them. For Britain, the fall of France is a moment of reckoning. The nightmare scenario long feared in London has come to pass. A single power now dominates the mainland, from the Atlantic to the Russian frontier. Yet the cost of opposing that power without continental allies seems too great, and so Britain does not declare war, but instead seeks terms of understanding with Berlin. The Royal Navy remains unchallenged at sea, but on land, the German Empire stands supreme. In Berlin, the victory is celebrated with parades, medals, and speeches about a new age for Europe. The Central Powers have achieved what once seemed impossible. 2 great rivals destroyed in a single war, their borders expanded, their influence unshakable. But behind the triumph, there are voices already asking what comes next, and whether the peace they have forged will truly hold. Because across the vast territories taken from Russia, resentment smolders. Guerrilla bands gather in the forests of Ukraine and the mountains of the Caucasus, striking at garrisons and supply lines. And in the streets of Paris, though quiet now, the memory of occupation plants seeds of bitterness that may one day grow into something dangerous. For now, though, the German century has begun, and the world must learn to live under its shadow.
The years after the Central Powers' victory unfold with a strange mixture of celebration and quiet unease. From Berlin to Vienna, the streets are draped in banners, victory monuments rise in public squares, and the leaders of the alliance speak of a lasting peace built on strength. For the first time in modern history, a single bloc dominates the European mainland, stretching from the North Sea to the Black Sea and from the Baltic to the Mediterranean. In this new order, Germany stands at the center, its industries humming at full capacity, its universities attracting scholars from across the continent, and its military presence felt in every territory it claims as a protectorate. France's economy is shackled by reparations and restricted trade. The once great Russian Empire lies broken, its western lands now governed directly from Berlin or through compliant regimes. And Austria-Hungary enjoys a revival of influence as a senior partner in a victorious alliance. The Kaiser's ministers move quickly to consolidate this dominance. A customs union is established across Central Europe, lowering tariffs and aligning currencies to favor German exports. New railways and telegraph lines knit the empire's farthest edges into a single economic network. German becomes the language of diplomacy and commerce in vast swaths of the continent. And though local cultures remain, the influence of Berlin's policies is unmistakable. Britain, spared the destruction of war, focuses on its empire overseas, maintaining naval supremacy but avoiding direct confrontation with the continental hegemon. Trade between London and Berlin continues, cautious but profitable. The two powers circle each other like wary lions, neither willing to provoke a new war so soon after the old one's end. The United States, untouched by the conflict, deepens economic ties with the Central Powers. American investors pour money into rebuilding and modernizing European cities under German guidance. Yet, beneath the surface, the stability is brittle. In the annexed territories of the East, resentment festers. The promise of self-government made in wartime propaganda is replaced by military governors and strict economic oversight. Underground movements grow in Poland, Ukraine, and the Baltic states, supported quietly by exiled revolutionaries who refuse to accept the new order. In the Balkans, Ottoman and Austrian influence chafes against rising nationalist movements, each hoping that the next shift in power might give them a chance at independence. In France, the occupation of its industrial heartlands fuels a slow burn of humiliation. Political factions argue endlessly about how to respond, some calling for reconciliation, others dreaming of revenge. The French military is a shadow of its former self, but its pride remains, and its officers quietly study German tactics, waiting for a day when the balance might shift again. In cafes and universities, a new generation grows up under the memory of defeat, a generation that sees Germany not as a neighbor, but as a master to be overthrown. Meanwhile, in Germany itself, the victory brings both prosperity and strain. The wealth flowing from occupied territories enriches industrialists and fuels urban growth, but the demands of maintaining a vast empire stretch the military thin. Veterans return home with medals, but also with stories of constant uprisings in the East, of guerrilla fighters that fade into forests and marshes, striking supply trains and patrols before disappearing. The public cheers parades in the capital, yet rumors of endless policing actions abroad hint that peace may be more fragile than it appears. Still, for now, the German century moves forward. Advances in science and engineering accelerate under generous state patronage. Airships and new aircraft connect distant capitals. Radio broadcasts carry news and propaganda to the farthest reaches of the empire. Artists and writers debate what it means to live in a Europe defined not by a balance of powers, but by the dominance of one. And for those who have grown up only knowing the Central Powers' victory, it feels as though this order may last forever, though history rarely allows such certainty to endure unchallenged.
By the mid-1920s, the German-led order over Europe stands tall on the surface, yet small fractures have begun to form in its foundations. The victory of the Central Powers has brought immense wealth to Berlin and Vienna, but it has also created a map of conquered peoples who never asked to live under the eagle's shadow. In the East, the puppet states grow restless, their leaders often little more than German appointees, their citizens whispering of independence in markets and churchyards. Guerrilla raids continue in the forests of Lithuania and the plains of Ukraine, each one answered with swift reprisals that breed more hatred. In France, the wounds of defeat have not healed. Though the government keeps a careful peace, underground networks of former soldiers and young nationalists train in secret, smuggling arms from sympathetic merchants abroad. Their goal is not an immediate uprising, but the careful preparation for a future moment when Germany is weakened. The humiliation of occupation has become part of the national story, passed quietly from parent to child, feeding a flame that time alone cannot extinguish. Britain watches all this with calculated patience, its empire still vast, its navy still unmatched. Yet London knows that sooner or later the ambitions of Berlin may clash with its own. Trade agreements keep the peace for now, but intelligence reports from the continent speak of German naval expansion and new colonies being claimed in Africa and the Pacific. The balance is shifting slowly, and the Admiralty does not like the direction it is taking. The United States thrives in this divided yet stable world, selling goods to both Britain and the Central Powers, investing in European industries, and enjoying the benefits of a war never fought on its own soil. American isolationism runs deep. There is no talk of sending soldiers across the Atlantic. Yet in the halls of power in Washington, a few voices quietly warn that a single dominant power in Europe could one day turn its gaze across the ocean. Inside Germany, the victory generation begins to age into leadership. The young officers of the Great War now command divisions, ministries, and factories, their worldview shaped by the triumph of arms and the belief that German organization can solve any problem. Yet they face challenges their predecessors did not. The cost of policing an empire is rising. The occupied territories are expensive to pacify, and the dream of a smoothly integrated continental economy runs into the reality of smuggling, sabotage, and cultural resistance. Austria-Hungary, once the weaker partner, enjoys prestige from the victory, but struggles with its own patchwork of nationalities. The empire is held together by the shared success of the war, but its internal tensions never truly vanished. The Czechs, the Croats, the Serbs all watch the unrest in the east and wonder if they too might someday break away. The Ottoman Empire faces similar strains, its territories in the Middle East proving difficult to control as Arab revolts flare and fade. By the late 1920s, the German century that once seemed unshakable begins to feel less like an eternal order and more like a delicate balancing act. Berlin still commands the largest army in Europe, still dictates the terms of trade, still hosts conferences where lesser nations listen more than they speak. Yet the costs are mounting, and the quiet rebellions are growing bolder. In the cafes of Paris and the alleys of Warsaw, in the ports of Odessa and the mountains of Armenia, small sparks of defiance light in the darkness. History is rarely content with a single conclusion. The war that ended with Germany victorious has not erased the forces that drive nations to challenge power. It has only delayed them, and somewhere in those restless corners of the empire, there may already be a young leader dreaming of a day when the map will change again, when the eagle's wings will falter, and when the world will be reshaped once more by the thunder of guns and the gamble of men who believe they can master the tides of history.